But yeah, I mean, does anyone else have any comments on this model? Just like looking at the UVs themselves. I actually just realized, I'm like, oh yeah, I guess the flannel technically does work as a UV checker texture. All right, so if I open this in Maya real quick, find the actual project. Oh. All right, so I'm going to, what the heck settings are these? All right, so I'm gonna just open the UV texture editor really quick. Dump this off to the side because I despise it. All right, so like if I come in here and I look at these UVs, I think for the most part they look pretty good. So there's a few things that I noticed right off the bat, and that's that the shells, like, they're laid out really nicely, but it looks like they're going off of the UV grid plane, and what that's going to do, I'm actually really surprised that that's not more noticeable. Yeah, so like right here, it's gonna start repeating, like, so this piece of texture is gonna just be pulled from this area down here. So what I'd probably do is just scale all of these down, and that way you get total control over all of the elements of your UVs and how the texture is applied to them, because there's not any kind of Maya automatically deciding to wrap your texture and having it show up on parts of your model you might not expect. So are there any questions about that? Like why you want stuff inside this square, basically. Oh, it'll totally work. Yeah, so the thing, ramp shader, that would be excellent. All right, yeah, so if let me really quick, I'll throw a ramp shader on this guy. And then I'll turn on my shaded mode. All right, so this is just like a ramp shader on it. Probably like a pretty reasonable thing to demo this on. So you'll notice, like, if I scale this outside of this original UV square, the textures start wrapping. So like here's like basically the end of my ramp, which is totally white, and then it's combined with the beginning of the ramp, which is black. The reason that it's doing that is because it's pretty much happening like right here, like where these UVs are cutting off. So like anything outside of this plane is just going to start sort of procedurally duplicating the texture and applying it, if that makes sense. So that's like why you see like the bottom here, these sort of faces down here, they're grabbing the top of the texture because it's basically like, okay, I'm going to remap this ramp texture, so like going from black to white. I'm just going to do that up here, so it's, you know, white in this area of the texture, and it's pretty much being displayed on the bottom of your bottom like that. Does that kind of make sense? Okay. Yeah, so that's the first thing I would notice. I would just say just scale down your textures, and that way, again, you have full control over how your textures display. For something like this, where it's just like a checker texture, it's like not as weird, but if you had something where it was like a face or something like that, you probably don't want like the sides of your face wrapping around and applying random pieces of face to like your ear, which I've done before. It's incredibly creepy. But yeah. So any more questions on that? All right. So the other thing that I noticed is it looks like, if I grab, I'm trying to like grab this UV here. So it looks like this UV is overlapping ever so slightly. And that's like actually a really subtle thing that's like kind of hidden on your model. Like functionally, this probably wouldn't cause issues. But like if you just like grab that and just shift it down a little bit, so that your UVs aren't overlapping. And this is kind of the same thing a little bit as why you don't want your UVs going outside of the UV plane. Is like the same reason that you, for the most part, don't want them overlapping is because you don't have control over what the texture is doing in that area. It's pretty much, it can only be one thing, because the texture can only specify like, you know, a certain range of image. And if you have your UV shells overlapping, they're going to basically show up with that image on it. so I'm actually curious. Does that make sense? Okay. So if I grab this shell and just do a modify unfold, actually, that wasn't too bad, surprisingly. Actually, weird. Okay, it seems like doing a modify unfold actually might be what broke the thing in the first place, because I didn't unfold and it made this little crease thing back in here. But yeah, I mean, that's anytime you let Maya automatically do something for you, it's not a bad idea to like check it and make sure it doesn't like do weird stuff like it just tried to do there. It's also bizarre because like I'll unfold this again. Grab shell, unfold. But it's a little. If it actually chooses to unfold, there we go. Yeah, so it's weird. If you look at this in unsmoothed mode, the UVs are fine, and then as soon as you smooth it, they get like the weird overlapping bit. It's kind of bizarre. But yeah, so I mean, I think apart from that, this little guy is like overlapping ever so slightly. I might just go through and like figure out what these little edges here connect to. And then just sew those together. And that's just, I'm selecting the edges, right clicking, going to cut and sew, and I'm just going to do move and sew. And you'll see that it took that little piece and tacked it right on up here. And then it actually looks like, yeah, it looks like I could also potentially tack this onto the bottom of that. Not sure exactly what I'm sewing together here, but yeah. So I think the other thing that might be good for this particular model is to, just I guess in the spirit of keeping as few seams as possible, what you could do is go through and like stitch these edges together in here. Because right now they actually match up pretty well like visually. But like as soon as you get to this giant piece that I like was fiddling with and unfolded, it kind of starts not matching up in terms of the texture. So what you could do is just grab these edges where there's the seam here. So you'll notice like when I double click the edge in the viewport, it selects it again in the outliner. And then again, I'm just going to do a move and sew. So right click, cut and sew, and move and sew. And then it's attached all of these together for better or worse. I'm going to see what happens if I do a modify unfold. That seems to make it slightly less hideous. And then again, I could just scale that down so it's in the UV plane. And yeah. And then if I wanted to, I could also go back in and like grab some of these faces or like some of these edges and just keep stitching these together. So like this, you could probably actually get this shape into like one part for the most part for the UVs, and then maybe you could like leave this little cutout separate. So if I were going to go back and redo things, I think that's probably what I would do. And that would just guarantee, so like once you put that awesome little flannel texture back on here, it would pretty much guarantee that the texture would wrap around the corners nicely. Does that make sense? Cool. Any questions about any of the stuff that I just did for that? Cool. And then pretty much, it looks like more or less the same comments for the other side of this. I mean, there's like a really weird stray UV hanging out over here. So that's probably something like an unfold or just manually moving the UV could fix. And then just like seam like all of these edges together. So that you have, like this piece you could definitely get in one piece and just have that on there as well. But yeah, so any questions or comments before I found? Oh yeah, okay. So questions and comments before I find another project. All right, does anyone want to volunteer their project? Alrighty then. See, no one's feeling brave today. It's okay. All right. Nice. Teapot. Cool. I like it. Cool. All right. So does anyone have any thoughts or comments about the teapot as it exists? It looks kind of fancy, like in terms of it's a very like weird sort of monochrome image. Kind of like it. Anyway, UV checker textures are good. So if I look at this, it looks like there's a little bit of stretching actually right up here. possibly on the inside of this handle, but I can't really tell. And then it actually also looks like all of the stuff up here is stretching, which does make kind of an interesting texture on the teapot, but is still probably a little weird in terms of actual UVs. So, if I look at this, let me, hey, I always forget that Maya has like a default UV checker in it. If you, by the way, if you hit 6 in the UV editor, it'll toggle your texture on and off, which, like, I personally can't look at this. This makes me, like, super ill feeling. So I'm just gonna turn that off for now. But yeah, so it looks like this was the model from the NURBS assignment, I would guess. And so, I mean, there's, like, N-GONs and stuff in the model that's, like, causing some weirdness, but in terms of the UVs themselves, it looks like this was more or less just an automatic map, which I have a feeling is going to be slightly... This is why N-GONs are gross. Like, I can't double-click and just select this whole edge. Or this edge. Oh my god. Alright, I'm gonna... okay, fine. Indecision. So I'm gonna grab the shell, and I'm gonna do a modify unfold, because I have a feeling that it's kind of... I think what was happening with it originally is... so there was a cylindrical map done, so you notice kind of, you can see like where the geometry gets sort of... it'll get like thick and N-GON-y sort of at the top of the model here, and it's like thinned out down here. But if I select these UVs in what looks like the center of the model, you'll see that it selects both the inside, or it selects UVs on both the inside and the outside of the model, which is telling me that my UVs are basically overlapping. So the quickest way to fix that is to just do modify and unfold, and it should, you know, mush these down and basically unwrap my pot so that theoretically, yeah, like here's the outside of my pot. You can see if I select these faces, it's probably hard to look at. If I select these UVs, it's only grabbing the UVs on the outside of the pot. And then if I select up here, it's only grabbing the inside of the pot and the base, because I just highlighted that. But yeah, so this would be pretty much doing that. It's gonna make the texture a little bit, not too bad actually. It's gonna make it a little bit less square. Like it'll look good on this one side. That's kind of like right down the center of the UVs. But as you get around to the edges, it'll tend to warp it a little bit more. Kind of like when I was demoing UVing a sphere in the video. Same basic principles with that. That's happening here, where it's distorting these outer edges, and that's causing the distortion in the actual texture. So I think that's probably, like, if I were gonna do anything further for this, I would just make sure all of the UVs are not overlapping. So you have like the outside bottom of the pot and then the inside bottom sitting on top of each other. So like just drag them somewhere not on top of each other. But I think this would actually be pretty workable more or less for the what am I trying to say? Like if you wanted to texture this, like these UVs would be more or less workable for the outside of the pot. You would just need to take a little bit of care, like if you're doing a texture that needs to match up along the sides, you just have to curve the texture in a way that it actually lines up along this seam. So does that make sense? Like questions about this part of the model? All right then. I still get really suspicious when I'm like, anyone have questions? And everyone's like, no. Anywho. Wow. Holy crap. All right. Alright, there we go. Alright, so look at this, apart from the N-GONs. And this is another thing where it would be nice to see this end capped off. But apart from the N-GONs, I mean, I think this actually looks pretty much as I would expect. Yeah, I mean, that's pretty much good for that. And then this handle, also, yeah. So, like, Well, this kind of looks like a piece of fish for some reason. I don't know. Anywho. So like this, and these are pretty much good. So that's the nice thing about these is that there's like a single seam running up one side of the object. So that if you're looking at the object from this direction, you're pretty much not going to see any seams in your texture anywhere because they're all hidden on this side of the object. So that's definitely good. One thing you could do if you wanted to, that's the wall. You could actually grab, so like if I took these UV shells, and I'll just like, I could throw these like in a corner somewhere, awkwardly, just, yeah. Like if you wanted to, you could lay out your entire pot texture basically on the UV plane. So that way you can just assign one texture to this, and you could actually customize the textures, like if you wanted different scroll patterns on like the handle versus the cup. You'd still only need to make one texture file for this instead of having to create a separate handle for the texture, one for the pot, and then one for the little spout part. Does that make sense? Cool. A lot of times, if you're making like games or something like that, for efficiency of use in textures, because the more textures a like game render engine or whatever has to load, usually it'll cause it to get a little bit slowed down. So one thing that you'll do a lot of times is you'll have what's called a texture map or like a texture atlas. And if you have, say, a bunch of plants, like you have like different little flowers and grasses and like stuff like that, you'll throw all of them on one giant texture map and then just like use that for all of your plants. And it's just like it's just an efficiency thing. But yeah, so I mean, I think this looks pretty good for the most part. Anyone else want to volunteer their project? All right then. Pick one more random one and see what happens. Whoa. Dude, this is so trippy. I like it. So I don't know why. There's something incredibly satisfying about this image to me. Anywho, so when I look at the UVs, it looks like there's some like kind of weird distortion going on, and some of the seams are pretty visible. So if there's one more render. Oh, nice. Okay. So the UVs on the sides are actually pretty good. So it looks like mostly just issues on like a little bit here and like the top and bottom. I'm curious why there's like different hammers with different UVs on them, but it's still kind of cool. All right, so let's see what the actual Maya file looks like. All right. So, dear God, what am I clicking right now? All right. I'm actually just gonna assign. So wait, why are there multiple hammer files? I ask mostly because I can look at a specific one if there's a specific one that needs looking at. All right, it looks like this one has the most complete UV, so I'm just gonna isolate select this dude and work on this for now. All right. So again, the first thing I noticed about this is it looks like the UV shells are very much outside of the texture area, going from like 0 to 1. So I'm just going to scale those down a little bit. And then I'm actually going to 5 seconds. I want to make this texture a little bit denser. So I think I mentioned this last week, but if you ever assign like a checker texture or whatever, if you go into this place 2D texture node, you can actually basically make it denser or whatever if you want. So like if I'll turn on, this is actually a pretty good visual indication. So like right now I have it set to repeat 8 times on the U and 8 times on the V. If I set this to 100 and 100, it's gonna make super tiny baby checker pixels in here. So this is actually a convenient way if you're ever using like default Maya textures to go through. You can just like resize them automatically like this if you need to. But anywho, all right, yeah. So and I think the next thing I would probably do with this, just to see what's happening, because it looks like there's a few different UV shells hanging out in here. So like apparently, like all of these guys down here are actually their own shells. So I think the easiest thing to do for this might actually just be to remap it. So I'm actually just gonna make a new UVs for this. So I'm just gonna go to UV automatic, and now you'll see I have a set of functional, if not a little bit disorganized UVs in here. Strictly speaking, just doing this would fulfill the requirements of the assignment, but I can 100% tell if you do this, and these are not good UVs. But anywho. Alright, and then, so from there, I think I would just go through and basically seam the stuff together as if or seam the stuff together to get as few seams as possible. And I might, like for this handle area down here, like that should be a different texture. I'll leave that as a separate UV shell, because it'll make life a little easier when it comes time to like bring this into Photoshop or whatever, and then actually create the texture to it. So what I'll just do is I'll start with, I'm actually just going to select around this whole edge here, and sever that entire UV, just to make sure it's separate. So I'm going to go to, I just selected my edges in the viewport, right click in your UV editor, go to cut and sew, and cut. And you'll notice that after I did that, this white line carries all the way across. This is just a way that Maya is telling you, like, hey, there's a seam in the UVs right here. So does anyone have questions about like what a UV seam is or anything like that? Okay. So at that point, I would pretty much just go through and keep clicking on edges and doing move and sew basically until these are all attached together. So I can just double click the entire side. You'll notice when I click the side, it'll highlight basically the side in two different areas. So since this edge has two faces attached to it, like here would be the faces from one side of this edge, and then here's the faces from the other side. So when you select this and displays in the UV editor, it's going to display as like two edges selected, because this edge is shared by two different UV shell boundaries. So again, I'll just do cut and sew, move and sew, and you can see that it'll stitch those together. I would basically just keep going around and doing this. I'm just going to hit G to move and sew again. And then I think if I did that one more time, so like you'll notice, so like you can see the seam here where the checkers pattern doesn't line up. If I move and sew, it fixes that. And at that point, I have basically one UV shell for like most of this bottom part. I'd still need to go back in and like sew on this bottom piece. Why am I clicking? All right, yeah. So pretty much that more or less works. Could be a little more elegant here on the bottom, but like you get the point. So any questions on doing the bottom part of this? All right. So for the top, probably what I would do again, I might just sever this for the sake of simplicity. So like I'll just grab, I'll grab these edges here, and these guys, and I'll just do right click, cut and sew, and cut. So once that's done, I should be able to go through and basically sew the different sides of this, this upper part of the handle. Sew these together in the same way as I did last time. So I just selected all of the sides that I needed, and so like for a square, like something with 4 sides, I'm only selecting 3 of the seams. You can't sew all 4 of them together, or else it basically isn't going to represent well in a 2D space. Think of if you had like a paper towel roll or like a toilet paper tube. To get it to lay flat, you would need to like cut it down one side and stretch it open. It's the same thing with UVs. So again, I'll just do right click, cut and sew, and move and sew. And you can see that now I have a lovely UV shell that is the entire shape of this handle here. I would also need to go in and just like clean up this bottom pit here, or this bottom part, because there's like some weird stuff happening there. But, yeah. So you'll notice that's an example of when move and sew does very weird things. In which case, theoretically, you should be able to just do modify unfold. And you'll notice that it's doing like really hideous stretching in here. That's actually because like this seam in here, this is like that very bottom, it's like the very bottom piece under this area. And I need to cut one of these edges if I want this to be able to stretch properly. So I'm just going to click on this little edge here, go to cut and sew, and cut. And once I do that, I should be able to go through, and you'll see I can also click on edges just in the UV editor as well. I'll just grab those guys, I'll just do sew, and then I'll grab the whole shell again, and this time if I do an unfold, it should behave more like I want it to and be an actual square. At that point what I do is just grab these guys here and just sew those together. So any questions on the middle part of that hammer? Alright. For the top part, it's honestly kind of just brute force. You just... Dear God. This is like a really gross demo object. UVing hammers is evil. I've done it before, and it's just like, ugh. But anywho. So I mean, you pretty much go through and systematically try to decide like where the best places for your seams are. In this case, I'm going to try to make as few seams as possible wrapping around the sides like this. I'll try to hide all my seams like in here, because that seems like somewhere where it might be less noticeable if you were rendering this. So just grab these guys. And again, I'm using the move and sew tool, and I'm just hitting G to activate that. And you can see that it's starting to make like an awkwardly shaped UV shell there. So I just go maybe grab like the front of this, and sew that one as well. Cool, like front of the hammer. I don't know. Shapes like this are always super weird. Yeah, and then I clearly just sewed something on that made awful things happen. Yeah, that was gross. Every once in a while I get really aggressive. I'm like, what happens if I just sew all of this together? So pretty much what I've just done here is interesting. Yeah, so I sewed like this entire front part of this hammer into this one little spherical part of the UVs. So if I look at this with my texture, you'll notice that like there's no seams in this, but it's stretching super badly because of the way that I've laid out the UV seams. So in this case, what I'd probably want to do is just select this edge that runs like roughly down the center of this, and if I just cut that edge, so you'll notice there's a seam there now. I'll grab this UV shell, and again do a modify unfold, and like really janky looking in the UVs, but it does display the texture with, there's still some like warping up here, but it does display this like much better than it did 10 seconds ago. So UVing is just sort of like, it's a little bit just like brute force going through and being like, where can I cut these seams that's going to minimize the number of seams I have, like the number of places I'm going to see this checker pattern not matching up, and also give me a reasonable amount of not having stretching in my model. Interesting. Yeah, okay, so if I unfold this again, you'll see I just cut a little bit further up here. It makes a weird sort of like lumpy gap in here, but it's not technically overlapping, so it's like not actually a problem. It's just weird looking, and you can see the stretching is like still less of an issue. So I'd probably just keep going through and unfolding, like just sewing stuff together, and then maybe cutting a few more edges for seams until the whole top of this hammer was attached together. And speaking from experience, I can say that hammer UVs are pretty much always going to look really, really weird. hammers are just very awkward objects to UV. But yeah, so, I mean, does anyone have any questions on anything I just did? So, the other thing that I want to, I guess, ask about, does UVing make sense to people? Like, do you understand what UVs are and I guess what ideally UVs might accomplish or look like once your UV map is done? I'm going to take the silence as everyone understands. So if you have questions, please stop me now, because if you do, I'm sure someone else has the same question. All right. I'm going to take that as everyone understands UVing. So again, I'll just pretend that I've finished the top of this hammer. This like actually looks like someone skinned a gingerbread man. Yeah. Anywho, so again, ideally, like the whole top of the hammer would be one piece. It is gonna be a ridiculous, hideous shape like this. Like if you get UVs that are this shape, that is not at all unreasonable. Like if you see UVs for a human person, it just looks like an awkward filleted. It looks like a bearskin rug. Like that's pretty much what UVs do for objects like this. They just look ridiculous. And again, so assuming that I was like done with these, happy with the way that this was actually laid out, I would probably just go to modify and layout, and that will pack all of your UVs into the UV space. This is an example of like Maya not doing that terribly efficiently. So it might be easy, like it's not using like a quarter of this space up here, so it might actually be easier to just go through and manually position these to make better use of the texture space, and that way you could also separate, like cool, I want maybe all my metal pieces up here, and like the base of the handle down here, and that'll just make your life easier for texturing. So any questions on that? Alrighty then. In that case, are there any, I mean that's pretty much crit for today. So are there any other questions on anything we've done in Maya up to this point before I go on? Yes?
I have like a question regarding UVs.
Okay.
So like when you go to a site like texture.com or like Polygon to find textures, there's like several different like photos that come up. Like one's white, one's purple, one's like the color of the.
Oh.
So like how do you put those together in Maya in order to like actually make the texture?
Yeah, so, yeah, I know what you mean. So it'll give you, like if you go to PBR materials, what the heck? What are these materials? This is ridiculous. If I just, ooh, new materials, holy crap. So like it'll give you like, here's your color and like here's all these other weird things. Yeah, so this is actually pretty much today's lesson, is like a simplified version of this. But it's basically, you can map in to your material like color, roughness, a bunch of different attributes like that. And if you put enough maps together in like the right channels, it'll basically allow you to create really, really realistic looking textures.
But like, how do you put that? Like my issue was being able to put them all together in Maya.
Okay, oh, so like how to assign different maps to a single...
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Yeah, so I'll go over this more specifically later, because like I said, that pretty much is today's assignment. But like, if I were to just make a new material, I'll do Arnold surface. So like I could map in, say, just click on, you know, little checker thing like usual. I'll map a checker into the color of this object. And then if I wanted to map on something else, say to the roughness of the specular, I could go through and just click on the little box next to that as well. I'll assign that, I don't know, noise texture? Why can I never find noise textures? Because I can't type. Yeah. And this isn't super going to show up unless I actually render this. Throw in a sky dome. See how hideous this render comes out. But yeah, so I mean, you'd pretty much just go through and systematically, you know, click on all of the little texture bubbles here and map in textures until you had what you were looking for. So you'll notice, like, I have the color of this, but it's also like this sort of really weird squiggly pattern is like the specular from this noise map that I put into the roughness. Does that kind of answer your question?
Yeah.
Sweet. Yeah. So any other questions? Is that cool?